Alright, it looks like we're back with our continuation of our Tuesday train. This is again a unclear winner stays on lobby today as we are testing certain of our knowledge and interactions in the game. But still mostly practice, still mostly beginner-ish. The sort of play you'd expect from some people who obviously don't play this game often but are interested in fighting games and play games in general. So more with punishes, more understanding of flow, but not a lot of combos, and sometimes not a lot of ways out of pressure or recovery. You can feel free to join us, of course, especially if you are somewhat into the game but more of a beginner yourself, although today obviously you cannot expect as much if you are a complete beginner, simply because you're more likely to lose, and we are playing winner stays on today. Depending on your skill with actual physical execution though, in terms of beginner to understanding UNIST, you can of course check out our bots at 2-mk.org. I keep on saying UNIST, but the game is now UNCLR, unclear as we call it, and I've been told definitely that is not how you're supposed to pronounce it, but will probably never change because it's too funny. There are a couple of changes to the moves and similar to the game that mean that our UNIST bots, which you can find by looking for UNIST-bots at 2-mk.org, will still probably work basically the same for this version of the game. What we expect is to have slight differences in behavior, and a lot of that can be changed based on the timing. Specifically, since many of the instructions as to how to input them tell you what is supposed to happen on screen, and there were different timings for doing it in the first place, there's a good possibility that a player who knows what they're doing can just make the adjustment with only very specific bots, like Batista, I believe, having changes that might mean they do different things or have different levels of charge timing, or little things like frame data that are very finicky. We haven't gotten around to doing a ton of research on exactly which things are different, mainly because it's kind of hard to know for sure. It involves reviewing all of our disk guidance segments, which you can of course use for yourself if you're not sure of what a bot's inputs or the outcome of those inputs are supposed to look like. You can find those on our YouTube channel, of course. So since this was cut off, we'll remind of all the basic things that you need to understand if you want to try to deal with this game. First is that backdashes are invincible. This is super important because a lot of the game's characters have long enough buttons that you will not feel as if you have any way out of their pressure unless you keep this in mind. The second thing is that combos can be really long without necessarily hurting you, but there are specific moments in those combos where you're likely to quote-unquote drop out and need to do a recovery in order to prevent your opponent from continuing their attack. Other things related to proration, specifically that if you just mash your quick buttons, as you can see being demonstrated now, the damage of your combos is reduced even more. If your opponent is mashing out of your stuff with quick buttons and hitting you, don't worry about it too much, they're going to take forever to finish you off. Watch out for issues you have in neutral or the frustration that comes from taking all that damage. But honestly, a lot of the time getting hit by a combo that started with a light attack is less damage than one heavy in neutral. Well, a counter hit heavy in neutral. It does become a problem when those buttons and similar are ways to get you to do things. And of course, therefore you must work on the psychological part of it. This game is a lot of the psychology of fighting games. If you can't control your mind or your actions, even if you have a lot of damage or combos, you're probably not going to do too well. We were discussing in the previous, well rather in the first half of the stream, that a lot of the game is also about learning to convert off of stray hits that you didn't necessarily expect to work, and requires a high amount of awareness for this, as well as knowing multiple combo paths for your character so that you can convert things into what you want, or to know when you can't and therefore should do all new combos. If you enjoy that sort of thing, this may be a game for you. You could say that it involves a lot of creativity, but by most standards, it's not the same type of creativity as a game like, say, Dragon Ball FighterZ, where you are aiming to create as many special options and long combos as you can. This is more so being creative in those moments where your shorter combos must be utilized, and understanding what options you have in them. It's also a very reset heavy game, and causing your opponent to misunderstand what you're going for in the reset is often helpful. But a lot of it is simply maintaining calm, maintaining your understanding of your own spacing, and what you really want to spend your time doing in any given match. Making it fun for those who like really strategic games with complex neutral interactions, let's say.
セカンドクローリバイドチャン懲りないねイコーラホルサイ一緒もう一回痛いねもうどうせもうこれでそれこの辺にそうやだよ行くよあらよ無駄無駄ほらほら行くよほらほら行くよみじん切りがいいから切り刻んでやめてよあらよ行くよブレイクダウンこれでよく生き残ってこられたものだワレンシュタインあとはお願いねいやまたあったねファーストフローディバイド
Seems like the requirements for facing Yan Matsumaki have to do with both patience and defense. It wasn't very clear because I didn't specify, but this is not actually justifying i.e. Hand Fist playing. In this case, we are looking at Amara playing Holstein as always. But due to her general flow, defense, and certain timings for when to get out of things come a lot more naturally to her, especially in the sense of understanding that large characters have to take risks a lot of the time and spend a lot of time looking for their opening in a different way than characters who create their openings do. Also being more comfortable with like small life loss. Being able to read when your opponent is likely to be in a mental state where that sort of thing works, at least at this level, is also really important. Since there's a huge difference between, okay, I really want to hit you with this move, and I think you've mentally shifted your own flow such that this move will hit you. You're not going to be right every time, and in fact, many people feel kind of bad when they get quote-unquote caught the 4th or 5th time they use it. But that doesn't always mean that your opponent has figured you out. Sometimes it just means that they happened to be in the right mindset at that moment, or just happened to jump. It comes up quite a lot, actually. One of the main things you have to learn in fighting games is that when you get countered, if you don't know what your opponent's mind state was at the time, don't assume you should stop doing your move. There's a reason why it worked the other times, and it probably wasn't all just, this person doesn't know how to react to this move. Of course, keeping in mind that there will be people who can react comes up as an important thing constantly. But with 10 seconds left on the clock and a life lead, throwing rocks is at this point basically a good answer. Because of the same thing I mentioned before. In any other game you'd think, oh well, that life lead is going to melt away, but in this game it really doesn't. Especially when the methods most people use to open up the opponent lead to very weak proration, i.e. lessening the damage of any follow-up combos. That is actually a relatively big life lead.
定めに従え光の鉄槌をファーストクローズディバイドエバージョン足元がおろすそりゃ息ここから
One of Wallstein's biggest problems against Aurier is in fact the fact that her backdash is so long that even his chase won't always catch her. But it does work the other way as well. Her backdash being so long means that she doesn't have an easy way in on Wallstein if he's playing very proactively. And most of her moves, while they do punish him for whiffing moves proactively, don't tend to do so in a way that lead to her getting a lot of damage. He can use this method to keep her out by putting her under pressure, forcing the backdash, and then relaxing somewhat. Meaning that she has to spend a lot more time running in, as you see here. Unfortunately for him, since most of his buttons don't actually stop her from doing this, it's relatively difficult to deal with, except if he's using down charge, because he can actually grab her out of it with the same charging move you saw before. Mostly, doing this on reaction can be somewhat difficult, but only if she does not actually commit to it, and if she's not actually committing to the run, then Wallstein doesn't have as many problems in the first place. Here's a good example. She has moves that will beat her way through certain things, but in the end they don't tend to deal with Wallstein's health or his general game plans. What works here for Aurier is playing a form of footsies that is hard to quantify, using Thanatos and sometimes using the bubble as a shield to deal with certain situations, to prevent you having to play the close range or the very far range game. Wallstein is relatively disadvantaged in mid-range against Aurier because of his limited options for hitting her while dealing with these things. If he's at mid-screen though, he can backdash out of a lot of the stuff she puts down himself. Meaning that this match becomes a large amount of how much space do I have on the screen to defend myself with. For Wallstein's side anyway. The closer he manages to push Aurier to the corner, particularly if his corner guard is good enough, the easier the match becomes, because when she is trying to get in on him or trick him, she can just backdash and say, here, fine, take the space. You have to commit to something anyway. This has to do with the limits on when she can do certain moves compared to the last time she tried it. But a lot of that has to do with how well you can read your opponent's mood. This situation therefore is optimal. Lots of corner guard options, huge amounts of space behind him, and an opponent who can't really do much except look for the best way to jump out of it. Aurier's solutions to this are often related to inching forward to get Vorpal so that she can keep more control of the situation. It's not really that denying Wallstein having Vorpal himself is all that meaningful to her. He does benefit, but not a lot compared to most characters. She's not super easy to zone with the rock, so she doesn't really care if he has Vorpal, but she does care a little bit if she herself has it. And from there, it's a matter of Wallstein's defense skills. One upside to this is that she is a very hard character to grab. And compared to most characters, she's very good at dealing with his air-to-air game and air approaches, having one of the better clash ratios in the game. If you jump, and both of these characters jump, compared to most characters, Ori is more likely to win that clash than most other characters are. It is at exactly that mid-range where the rock starts to help. And that's partially why she cares about whether or not Wallstein has Vorpal. It's a big risk on his part, but if he does correctly time the use of that move, it shifts a lot of things. And if the rock has the option to bounce the opponent, which it does in Vorpal, he gets better combos from it. Understanding when to stop your offense, therefore, is usually the deciding factor here. Since he's not really a character who can quickly dash in and grab, most people will react. And she doesn't have to stand close enough to be too vulnerable to anything else. Like I said, she's fairly hard to grab. Meaning that there is a specific spacing at which Wallstein has really little option but to at least try for the rock. But there's the other side of that same interaction. He absolutely can get the grab in if the player is thinking about getting to a specific space on the screen. Not to mention that one. Using that correctly is a huge help because of the aforementioned giving Wallstein a lot of space behind him to deal with the problem. Part of the reason for the effectiveness of the rock is that there is a very small hitbox on it when he's actually pulling it out of the ground. You can think of it as a way to destabilize the opponent's feet, but it only works at a very specific range. One that has probably never come up before, so we're going to have to see that later. I seriously thought that Error was actually like a person before. Which leads to the question of what happens if you actually like use your in-game concept as Error, but honestly that would require you to have your PSN ID as Error, I think. Yeah, probably. as we now have 2 errors, is pretty clear.
時は満ちた。
定めに従い光の鉄槌を。ファーストクローズディバイド。でもさ断罪。断罪。停戦。行きます。そや。やります。
その程度。
ウィナー円軌道。セカンドクローズディバイド。
逃がさん。おい。何？
油断します。行きます。
光る。
父は。
光る。逃がさん。深く。シュン。
行きます。
無駄光る。まだまだ螺旋。まだまだよ。
The other reason to deny your opponent Vorpal and all of the options that go with it is because they can use it to do more powerful drive cancels. Just hitting D mid-combo will allow you to do more effective things at the cost of giving up the Vorpal state temporarily.
Winner 円軌道。定めに従い光の鉄槌を。ファーストクローズディバイド。
抜けよ。おい。シン。まだまだよ。
最後までしてウィナー電気道セカンドフローリバイド足元がおろしです。ここです。落ちます。行きます。足元ダッシュワン見えました。やりますね。無駄です。耐えてみせる。ここです。落ちます。行きます。ここです。断罪。基地を行きましょう。好き。ここです。基地を落ちなさい。行きます。
皆さん来い。
まだまだ行きます。何？ここです。ダンスセンサー見えますか？セイクリッドファイヤー。
皆さん
断罪。
皆さん無駄だ。
落ちなさい。行きます。
受け
耐えてみせる。そこです。ここです。エバージョン。ここです。ダンスセンサー行きます。
螺旋
基地をエバー勝敗は決します。ウィンオリエサードクローズディバイド断罪まだまだやります。行きます。断罪
隙ありつめ
やりますね。やります。
螺旋
ダッシュワン見えますか？セイクリッドファイヤー。エバージョン
皆さん螺旋
やりますね。ブレイクダウン
魂の語り合い楽しかった。
ウィナー電気道A new sacrifice comes to you.
Well, we're going to basically end our stream where we started, but with a different character being used on at least one side. The lounge is likely to stay open for a while. This game, despite the fact that the matches aren't too much slower than most other games, it often feels as if it's that way, partially because the lounge tends to fill up and partially because the amount of thinking involved can be a bit much sometimes, meaning that we're going to be going on for probably a while longer. This is one of those games I believe where the lounge does disband when the leader leaves, but we're not necessarily having the leader leave anytime too soon, so you can continue to look for 2MK, except for the fact that at the moment it's full anyway. So telling anyone that is not really super helpful. Just know that if you happen to still be looking for it and you realize there is a 2MK open, it's likely to stay that way for another hour, hour and a half-ish. I'd much more likely guess an hour. You can expect our next content to be on Thursday, though there might be something in between. Again, a lot of this depends on when and how the Guilty Gear Strive beta is available to us for actual use. There's a times given for when the beta should be active, but not necessarily. Because it's a beta, it could have all sorts of problems. Levels of interest in that beta are mostly going to be based on how many characters are available, and right now, if you know from who we play in Guilty Gear Xrd, specifically Rev 2, you know that not a whole lot of the characters that we normally play are actually available as yet, so it would be a lot more about game mechanics. Guilty Gear is one of those games that is complicated enough that if someone told you, well, okay, the beta's up, so you can test out stuff, but your character isn't in it, it doesn't really mean a whole lot to you.
力だけでも技だけでも道理とは砕けぬもの共に必要だか。時は満ちた。
イグジスの使い方を教えてやろう。
In fact, it's not entirely clear because as far as I know, not every character that was revealed is even playable. So you'll definitely see something from us, but you're not going to see anything higher level or on the level of big analysis. Mainly because, according to what I'm seeing here, playable characters are listed as Sol, Kai, Mei, Axel, Chip, Potemkin, and Faust. We definitely know some people where this could be a thing, but since it's usually a network test beta, you often don't get to hang around and play with friends specifically, or anything similar. So given that that list does not contain, we don't even know if most of these characters are going to be in the game, but you know, some of them might be a little weird to leave out. Even if we go back all the way to general older characters, we still do not have as yet Slayer, Jam, Baiken, Ino, and Sin and Answer were basically out of the picture from the beginning. So it's likely that this is going to be mostly just watching Army Rabbit get used to Kai. Maybe Cosmic Wolf will give us some Axel play depending. And I guess I can try to make Chip work. We'll see if we can talk Amara into throwing down with Potemkin, but overall, it's not the sort of beta test that is, in our case, going to draw a lot of attention in terms of, oh, let's see what we can learn here. It's more so going to be, let's see what's different here. And a lot of that has been online already. So don't expect any in-depth content from us, but you might get something. On Thursday, we're more likely to have our Dead or Alive 60 times lounge. Unless, of course, the only option we have for streaming any Guilty Gear is that time. And Friday, basically the same thing. We normally have some sort of disc guidance, but we don't really have anything available at the moment. We're still doing testing occasionally. If Guilty Gear turns out to be best on that day, then you'll see it that day. But that brings us to the end of this stream. Join us later in the week for any content of the type that I just mentioned. Check out our Twitter @2_MK_FGC for any information on what we will be streaming, usually around 7 Eastern, and our site 2-mk.org for any bots that you want to use or check out. This has been Rillian for Team 2MK. Good night, everyone.